Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. And today, you're in for a treat. We have Therese Miclot with us, which is a dynamic leadership consultant and co-author of the Facilitation Advantage, a practical guide for leaders seeking to enhance their confidence, communication, and influence. Who wouldn't want to enhance your confidence, communication, and influence? Even I do. So we're excited to have Therese with us today. I'll turn it over to you, Therese, if you want to give us a little bit of your background and kind of how did you end up being an author and a consultant?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be on your podcast. And here's the short story about me. So I have my undergrad and graduate degree in industrial organizational psychology, and that's just a kind of fancy way of saying I was always interested in the psychology of business. And so I started my career in some typical HR roles, moved into HR strategy, and what I found in that role was that I was often in the rooms with the C-suite senior executives as they were talking about succession planning. Who would be ready, to one day fill some of the top seats? And as I was sitting listening to their conversations and debate, my job was to figure out, okay, how are we going to get them ready as leaders? There's one thing to be ready if you're a good, finance person, or you're, a principled engineer, or you're great, as a salesperson. But that tends to not be enough when you rise into more senior level roles. You have to also have a different set of skills that are around leadership. And so I found that to be my passion. From there, I focused on global learning and development. I did that for a multi-billion-dollar company. And then I've spent the last 10, 15 years really focusing in a variety of industries, from tech to media to retail to banking, focused on how to help accelerate leader readiness. And the book came about because as I was really looking at what are the common denominators amongst the best leaders, what I was finding was that it was actually a set of skills that are very correlated to facilitation. And you might think, well, I'm not a facilitator. That's somebody else's job. That's a trainer. But my co-author and I deeply believe that that's not true, that we're all facilitators because we have to get things done through and with others. Whether that's you're leading a board meeting, you're leading a team meeting, you have to present and give an update at a team meeting. That is facilitation because it's getting things accomplished through others. And we wanted to make it approachable and easy for leaders to be able to learn those skills and start to see the results from them.
So it's always fascinating many times I think when people hear the word psychology or anything like that, they kind of turn and sometimes run the other way. And I think it's so fascinating. You've pointed towards facilitation, and I would agree that I think at any point in our lives we're facilitating something. Even at home, we're facilitating a conversation. We're facilitating dinner.
Yeah.
Everything that we do, we have to kind of learn to work with others around us. And every time in my life that I have decided that I don't need to facilitate or work with others, I can do it on my own a lot better. Typically, that's when it kind of fails in disaster. But, in short version, my story, there's a real little piece of that my mother was, she was a cleaning lady, and she cleaned for many people around town. And as a young man, I got the opportunity to go with her. And what I recognized, and is why I have my passion for leadership, is that I started to recognize that every family interacted differently. And some of them were business owners, some of them were retired, some of them, were world-renowned furniture makers. Now, how did I end up in the middle of all of that, right? But that was so fascinating to kind of start to see that in the psychology, I guess the reality of how they all worked. So I am curious, knowing a little bit about your background, how did the challenges your mother faced in her workplace influence your approach that you've taken in being a consultant and being in leadership and writing the book?
Sure. Yeah, it has everything to do with what I do today. So my personal backstory is that my father died at a young age, and I was 13. My mother didn't have a professional career or a degree, but had to now raise three teenagers. It really forced my brother, sister, and I to find jobs and also help support the family. As I would watch my mother take jobs that were clerical, where basically whatever she could get. As a child, I was watching her come home every day and bring the pressure and the stress of working for bad leaders. Leaders that didn't give good direction or give good feedback or help make, work clearer and easier to perform. And that left such an impression on me that from an early age, my ultimate goal was to really eradicate bad leaders. And I know that's a super lofty goal, because who has not worked for a bad leader, right? I mean, if you've been working for a while, I'm sure one comes to mind. It might have been, when you were in high school and, whatever. But I even today, as I work with more senior executives and more senior leaders, of course, my job is to help them become more capable leaders. But I'm always in the back of my mind thinking about the people that are at lower levels in the organization, that don't have as much choice, that don't have as much power, and that if the leader can operate better and inspire and motivate and develop and even give hard feedback when it's necessary, but do it in a way that's developmental, that it helps everyone. Because the reality is, we don't leave our jobs at work. They come home with us, the pressure, the stress, or even, the motivation. And so that to me is my, ultimate North Star, is how can I help people be the recipients of better leadership?
That is it might be a lofty goal, but I think that's an awesome goal. And I like what really gave you your passion, is just seeing how that affected your family and your growing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of chuckling, because as you started to say that, we all know a bad leader, and immediately what came to mind is I've probably been that bad leader a few times as well. And it kind of led me to a question, which maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So, if you find yourself and you're listening and thinking, maybe I am that bad leader, can you change?
Yeah. I think, well, I think that, the first step is self-awareness, right? That's most important, that if you don't see a need to change, then it's awfully hard to have someone else convince you to change. So, and I think it's also to recognize that most of us in our career move from a path of we're a doer, right? We're doing our job. Then we become a super doer because now we're effective at our job. And so people come to us and give us more. But the problem is, when you then move from super doer to manager or leader, that is a significant change that requires you to operate differently. And so many of us get stuck in the super doer mode, even when we're leaders. So here would be an example. Think about situations where, as a leader, you're not delegating, where you're overwhelmed with work. And the reality is that, it's time to now be able to shift that to someone else, but we don't do it. And, I've heard all of the really valid reasons, right? I can do it faster. I can do it better. I don't want to burden other people with it. But the problem is, you get stuck. And you get stuck in this, process of just continuing to still do the old way of how you worked, but now you're being expected to do more. It is a skill, like learning to ride your bike, learning to cook. So, but it does start with exactly where it seems like you started, which was self-awareness of there might be a better way.
So most people that make that switch, going from being a super doer to being thrown in, which I truly believe a lot of times they are just thrown in to, all right, you're the manager now. In their minds, they have a definition of management, which is authority. I'm the final decision maker, and those types of things. How do you define leadership at its core? What would be your definition of leadership, of a good leader?
Sure, sure. I actually think it goes back to facilitation because you're not just trying to manage yourself now, you're trying to manage a team. So, of course, you have the ultimate responsibility of outcomes, hitting your quarterly metrics and things like that. But your job, leadership is about how do you engage and accelerate others to be able to accomplish things, for the business, for better, results. And so you have to turn away from, doing it for yourself and how do I enable and grow talent and foster it and develop it.
So going in and saying you're going to do it because I'm the boss and I told you to do it isn't a good tactic then, is what you're saying.
I mean, I think it works in the short term. I will say this. It will absolutely work in the short term. It will not be a long-term strategy for a couple of reasons. One, really good talent still has options. They still have options. And I work with a lot of, companies where they're starting to see attrition from their best performers. And that is an alarm bell going off. And that's a problem because if you are investing in really good talent, you're training, you're developing them, you're giving them resources, and then they walk out the door, there is a bottom line number to that because of the time you invested, now the time to recruit. And so often the alarm bell starts to ring when you can quantify the cost of bad leadership. And I'm not just talking about engagement surveys. Some people, do engagement surveys to kind of put a little indicator on how happy are people. I'm talking bottom line that if you're losing good talent, I would start to look at how are people leading.
I recently was quoted saying bad communication in the workplace will cost any organization at least 20% more to operate than what it would if you had good communication, which facilitation, I mean, a piece of that is communication. Yeah. It seems pretty simple. You got to work with people. We recently had a guest that which I thought was very interesting. They said, delegation, many times we look at delegation as, I need to get something off my plate. Will you do it? Therese, can you do this? I'm really busy this week.
Yeah.
And we don't look at it at the opportunity that it is to grow people. Delegation should be an opportunity to grow those people into new roles. So that's often overlooked. Why do people overlook facilitation as a skill that they need to work on? Why do we overlook it?
I think it's because we don't understand it. And so in the book, we break it down into mindset, content, and process contributions. We call them contributions. They're skills, but they're the things you bring as like gifts into any kind of setting. So these are the skills. So one is self-talk, mindset. Is that the fact that as a leader, what you're saying to yourself about team members, about the business, about the challenge, it is a billboard on your forehead, even when you don't verbalize it. So one of the first things you have to do as a leader and as a facilitation skill is manage the voice in your head. The other skills are around content. So for instance, sometimes you're the expert. You grew the business. So you have all of the expertise, the knowledge, the domain, expertise, but you've got to be able to translate that. It's not just that you have it, it's how do I translate that to my board of directors, to my, incoming, C-suite, person I'm hiring. How do I take my vision and be able to translate it to my employees so that they buy into it? And then the last are process contributions. And they're all the ways that as a leader, you have to move people from point A to point B. Because like you said, Amos, you can just force people. You can just say, you're doing it because I said so, which is maybe very paternalistic and again, won't get you far in the long run. But there's other skills like listening that it's, if you want to get to the root of issues very quickly with people, and especially the more you're senior, people may not want to tell you the whole truth because they're worried how you're going to react or how you might blame them. And the problem when I work with a lot of senior leaders is they get to this level and they're like, I don't know if people are telling me the truth. I don't know if they're afraid to tell me what's really on their mind. Presence contribution. That is about when you're a senior leader, you can be intimidating to other people. Believe it or not, because you're just like, it's just me. But, walk the floor or, walk, into an office and people may change their behavior because they're like, oh, the boss is here. Well, one of the skills is how do you shift your behavior so that people feel very comfortable and will be candid with you and will tell you the truth straight up without trying to sugarcoat it, that will want to follow you, not just be fearful of you, but follow you. These are the skills. And I think when you can break it down that way, then people can map it to, oh, okay, those are everyday skills. Those aren't reserved for, again, a big presentation or, a big all hands meeting. Those are in the, moments of walking down the hallway and running into somebody and asking a really curious question that doesn't, get them to freeze, but gets them to say, you know what, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. And you want that as a leader. You want to be able to have a clear understanding of how people are experiencing the work, and often they're at the place where they can pinpoint issues pretty quickly, and you can solve things faster, quicker.
I had a manager once that said that as I was coming into a more senior management role, his advice to me was always now this was a manufacturing plant. And he said, when you want to find something out or you want to have a discussion with somebody, take them for a walk, walk around the outside of the building or what have you and point some things out. He said, and then once they're comfortable, they'll start to talk. And I couldn't believe how many times that actually, it really does work, because when you, as the leader, even, at a low level as a leader, when you call one of your subordinates like, hey, come to my office, I need to talk to you right away, they're immediately thinking, what did I do? I'm going to get fired.
Of course. Yes.
And the other vision that I had as you were talking, and I don't remember who said this, but, there's many times leaders think when they get there, like, okay, I'm there and I'm out front. And they kind of said, you're not a leader until the people are actually following you by definition. If people are pushing you out front, that means you've become, kind of the enemy and sacrificial. Like, let's push him up and see what happens to him before we follow. But I think what you said there, getting people to follow you is an important piece of that. So as people are kind of thinking through this, we have lots of people listening that are kind of at that crossroads. They're the super doers, and they're looking at making that move. What would you suggest to that person that is getting ready to go into that first managerial role and wanting to become a leader and not just a manager? What would be that piece of advice you think for them that could help them the most?
I think I would recommend you go back to this idea of managing the voice in your head, because everything stems from your thinking. So for instance, if you're now transitioning, and sometimes I'm working with a company that promotes a lot from within, and they were friends with their colleagues and now they're the boss. And now it's like, okay, how do I act? Do I act differently? This is strange and awkward. And so the first place is to really make sure the voice in your head is supporting you to operate as a leader. So that might mean, if you're, driving into work and you're thinking, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, or don't screw up, or, you're going to look like an idiot, or, we can be very critical and sabotage ourselves, particularly as we're making that transition from more individual contributor to leader. And that will tank you. And so I'm not suggesting you try to pump yourself up with platitudes, but I am suggesting that you start to think about self-talk that will help support your goal of being seen and operating as a more, stronger leader. So for instance, if you can shift that self-talk to, I don't know what I'm doing, I've never done this before, to, I've learned hard things before, and I can learn to do this too. just that, from right, don't screw up, to I've done hard things and I can learn this too, would lean you towards being more curious, maybe a little bit more open in how you approach things, show up with a little bit more confidence than just all nerves and walking into your office, closing the door and just head down and trying to get things done. I would start there, because everything emanates from that voice in your head. And then after that, I would be working on presence skills, how you communicate, right? How do you translate information to your employees in a way that's going to resonate with them? And how you engage in listening and drawing people out. You're probably leading meetings now. And I work with a lot of leaders who get super frustrated. They're like, it's like pulling teeth, Therese. I can't ever get anybody to talk. We just have these meetings and, go about our day. And it's easy to blame others for why they're not engaging with you. But you're putting the emphasis in the wrong place. It's probably because of the questions you're asking. So for instance, even I was thinking about, when you go and walk and talk, and it's such a good way to get people out of their kind of normal frame of mind. If you ask a question like, why did you do it that way? It immediately is going to put people on the defensive, right? Because now they're going to feel like, well, I have to give you a reason and justification. But in your mind, you might be like, no, as a new leader, I'm just trying to understand. I'm just trying to get to the root cause of issues. Well, people would not know that by the way you frame the question. So if you're a new leader, you have to give more context to your questions. So it might be, instead of why did you do it that way, it might be, hey, I'm still on a learning curve to really understand how everything's operating. I'm not looking to point fingers, just looking to understand. Why did you do it that way? And I don't know,
difference.
if I heard that,
yeah.
I would be like, okay, I'm going to tell you, here's where things worked and here's where they didn't. And I'm not, you're not pointing fingers. You're just trying to be able to understand. So that's where I would go next. I would start with self-talk. I would think about how I'm communicating. And that's presence and listening.
So something just hit me. You're a consultant. I'm a consultant. Mm-hmm. And we get thrown into messes. I mean, sometimes when people call, and not always, sometimes people say, hey, we have this great program. So please don't think that all of my clients are a mess. That's not what I'm saying. But many times we get thrown into a problem, and it doesn't faze us. Because you just said something that it kind of made me think that we understand that there's all kinds of hard things out there, but you can solve them if you work at them and you work your way through. So it kind of leads into my next question, which is, we've talked about the person that's making the switch from being a super doer to going to being a manager. Yeah. Now, what about the person that's been a manager for 10 years and has been a pretty horrible manager? And they've now gained that self-awareness and they want to change. How does it differ for them? Because I would suspect from my experiences that people are going to be very skeptical when they say, we're going to try something new, or they start to see changes within that person, like what's going on here. So how would the process differ for somebody that's been a terrible manager for 10 years?
Sure. I think the first thing is that you have to be really transparent about what you're doing. Because I worked with other leaders who, they're like, I'm trying to listen better, Therese. And like, people are looking at me with a side eye, like, what? Okay, why are you being so weird? And of course, because you have conditioned people to expect certain behaviors from you. And now if you're going to try to break that, they're not, without context and without you being transparent of, look, I really want to work on this. And so here's what I'm going to be doing differently. I'll give you a perfect example. This often I'm working with a leader who's pretty senior and has really not been good at giving feedback, has kind of let things run rampant. And it's now to a place where he's like, I gotta change this. But I can't come at people now, like all of a sudden I'm giving them a bunch of feedback and they never got it before. And now they're like, what's this? It's like a shock to the system. So we work a little bit on, okay, so for one is you have to convey to everybody, hey, you know what? We all need to develop, and I'm going to tell you the place that I feel like I need to develop. And that is, I haven't been great at giving you feedback, both positive and corrective for your development. I'm going to be doing that more. So I don't want you to be shocked or wonder, like, where's this coming from? And that kind of gave a little bit of a runway. So when he started to give feedback, people weren't like, well, who's this person? So I think that's the case. I will also say, I don't know if you use any psychometric tools, Amos, in your practice, but I use one called Social Style. It's very connected to emotional intelligence, and it's a bit of a 360. It's a multi-rater instrument, and that's often the starting point for leaders who are like, okay, I really want clear feedback about how I'm doing as a leader, and I'm open to change. And so when people feel like, okay, you want genuine feedback about how you're showing up as a leader, that also gives you the doorway to then come back and say, look, I'm accepting this feedback. Here's what I'm going to do about it. And so when you see me doing these things, just know it's about I'm taking your feedback and I want to improve in these ways.
Interestingly, you said that, and I was thinking as you were kind of giving that example, we do utilize DISC for personality traits. Yeah. But on that side, the other thing that I think can play into this is knowing your people. I've run into many leaders that have tried to make changes, positive changes, but really had never taken the time to get to know the folks that are working around them and for them. And the best example was we one particular place, we had an employee that really was very vocal about what needed to change, and for an extended period of time. And finally, when the leaders started to listen and started to make those changes, they started to give pushback. And I was scratched my head thinking, you've asked for change, now you're receiving change. But really what it boiled down to was that individual had figured out how to work within the system that was there, and they personally didn't like change. Although they were saying it out loud, it made them uncomfortable. But understanding your team so that you can know how to communicate with them and how to start to process those changes. So for the astute young leader that's out there and they think, you know what, I'm terrible at this. I'm picturing somebody saying, I'm going to go to AI and I'm just going to get AI to write my emails for me so that they sound better and my communication is better, so on and so forth. How do you see AI, remote work, and all of the new things that have kind of come at us over the past 5 years? How do you see those shaping differences in the future, and how will facilitation still be a part of that?
Yeah. Oh, I wish I had a crystal ball. But here's what I anticipate. So I think we have to embrace AI. It's here. I think we have to have a growth mindset about it. And I really think it's a great idea for emerging leaders to use AI as a way to help you frame messages, particularly when you direct it, to frame it in a way that's going to resonate with my employees or address their needs. I think it will take you only so far, though, because then you're going to have face-to-face conversations, right? That you're going to, whether you're leading meetings in person or virtually, and you're going to now need these skills because, unless you're going to have, well, hold on, let me have my AI agent tell you the answer. It can take you only up to, so far. And then you have to have human engagement. You have to have an ability to then, say those things and not just rely on technology. So I think that you still are going to need these skills because they're human skills. And I also think that in a way they help future-proof you. Meaning, I do think AI will really solve a lot of the challenges or a lot of the work that's done that's manual or that's repeatable. That's just, I think, the hard truth that we're starting to see very clearly. And so it's going to come down to how you have a set of skills that are about communication and connection with people. Especially even if you have to manage up, for instance, you're going to be caught in meetings where you're asked a question you weren't prepared for. It's just, right? I mean, it happens all the time, right? You get a curveball question you weren't ready for. So you're going to rely on a set of skills, and I think they're the facilitation skills to help you navigate those moments or those conflicts. You're going to have to lead change continuously, and you're going to have to get people on board with that change. And they're going to want to hear it directly from you. They're not going to want it in an email that was perfectly crafted by AI. So I think that's why, now more than ever, you need these skills.
And my biggest fear, which I utilize AI for different things, but my biggest fear is that I put something out that I didn't know what I put out. What I mean is my fear is that we become complacent with it, and you put out a message crafted through AI or something of that nature, but you never actually read it. And then it creates a mess for you, which we've heard stories. I mean, I think it's happened. So thinking about what we've talked about today, what would be your key takeaway for the audience that would be most important that you want them to take home with them today?
Yeah. I think it would be that raise your awareness about a set of skills that can really help accelerate you wherever you're at, whether you're an individual contributor, you are in a new leadership role, you're a senior leader, and that it is all accessible to you, and that it's skills. And so that if you can focus on a couple of those skills, you're already setting yourself up to be seen as a more followable leader, as a more credible leader, as a more influential leader. And to make it even simple, we have a free assessment on thefacilitationadvantage.com. Check it out. You can see how do you measure up on these facilitation skills. And I'm a big proponent of don't try to do everything. Just try to do one. Just focus on, that voice in my head, it can be really self-critical. I need to change that. That's just not going to help me because I'm going to be more visible now and more senior roles. Work on that. If it's when I get nervous, I talk too much or I give a really lengthy answer and I know people just want something simple, work on presence, work on how you communicate and work on your subject matter expertise, how you craft that for your audience.
So can people find out more about you at the same website? How can people get in touch with you if they're interested and want to find out more?
Sure. First, connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. My goal is to provide a lot of value and content. And again, that's back to how can I serve the memory of my late mother by helping to give really practical, quick tips to leaders. So follow me on LinkedIn. Follow me on my website, theresemiclot.com. And then you'll find more on the facilitationadvantage.com website.
Awesome. So every episode, we ask every guest that we have a few questions, and the first question is oftentimes it comes up that as we're talking about leadership, oftentimes people will say this is something you wouldn't learn in school, or this is something that our students today graduating high school don't gain this skill. Yeah. And so the question is, if we had all the administrators of the high schools and middle schools across the United States in front of us, and the elementary school, what would be your one piece of advice to them that here is something that we should be instituting in our school system that will help us end up with a more well-rounded, suited member of society ready to be a leader of some sort?
Yeah. This is a big one, Amos, but I feel it in my core, and that is we are not teaching people how to be good listeners. And the reality is we're not wired to be great listeners, right? That there's so much competing for our attention at every single moment, and that it is a deeply held skill. And we often think we're listening, but we're just waiting to reply, right? We're not really fully present and listening and below the surface, right? By that, I mean that you can take what people say just at the surface, or you can really listen deeper for what do they value? What is their intent? What's their mission in what they're telling me? What's their emotion? And there's so much more richness for us to understand people if we were better at listening. And we just aren't. And it's not taught in schools. And you learn it either a positive way from someone that has listened well to you, or you listen, sadly, from those that don't listen well. And that to me is just the highest leverage thing we could do, especially if you're teaching young people that have spent, these years of COVID in spaces where they haven't had to interact. Maybe it's call and response, right? Like, are you listening to the question I just asked? But I'm talking about a deeper level of listening that I think our whole society could benefit from if we treated it as part of core curriculum.
I think that is a great piece of advice. And I often think, I guess it's maybe selfish that I ask this question. I have an 11-year-old daughter that is getting ready to go to middle school next year. Mm-hmm. And, watching her grow up and seeing some of the things is so eye-opening, as to how they interact with others, so on and so forth. And probably one of the biggest compliments, I guess, to myself was, I'll never forget, she was probably 4 or 5. And we went somewhere, and when we walked in, I shook the person's hand and said, hey, good to see you. And she reaches out and shakes their hand and says, good to see you. Oh. And so we learned what we see, and if people aren't communicating and listening within the schools, how are they ever going to get it? So that's great.
That's right. Yeah. So I have a son who just graduated college and in his first job, and he was just saying, and I feel like I have to say something smart in this meeting. And I said, yeah, of course, we all want to say something smart, but also focus on being the big ear in the room, because oftentimes you'll hear people speaking over each other, or they're in violent agreement. They're just saying it in 5 different ways. You could really add value by being able to say, oh, hold on, I think we're saying this, or here's what the theme is. Is that right? And now all of a sudden you've added value, and maybe you didn't even, you weren't the expert in the topic to begin with. Yeah.
Yes, I can identify with that. I was thinking about the number of times I've been in situations, and a lot of times at this point in my life with volunteer organizations and those types of things, many times you find yourself in that, and I just sit back and listen and wait till everybody's kind of done, and then say, all right, now let's put this all together. So I think that's very valuable. So I
bet part of your practice, that's what you do naturally too, Amos, because there's, like you said, we're often as consultants brought into a problem, and there's the presenting problem. And then we're listening for, is that the root or is that just a symptom? Yeah. And it's just one of the most important skills, whether you're, again, an individual contributor, a teacher, a principal, professor, a consultant.
Absolutely. So the second question, now outside of your book, what is your go-to book that you have went back to over and over again throughout your life?
That's a good one. Throughout my life, I guess I can answer that throughout my career, at least. Yeah. And it is The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey.
Yes.
And what I love about that book is the practicality of it. It is an equation. And I think that there's so many spots in our work and life where there's an erosion of trust. And trust is like sand in the gears of getting things done. And so when, I'm working with 2 senior level leaders whose teams are just like cats and dogs. And what it does, that book, I continue to refer back to it. It can really diagnose, like what is underneath the covers around the break and trust, and then you can do something very practically to rebuild it.
Awesome. And the last question is today, what is your favorite piece of technology that you use?
My favorite piece of technology. I guess it's a simple one, but it's Dashlane, and it's where all my passwords are kept. It's like a password manager. It's so simple, and certainly it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it just does everything requires, more security and more authentication and all that. And like, thank God for that, because I need something to make my life simpler. So any app that does that gets a, high rating from me.
Yeah, I might have to find that one, because if you'd have told me 20 years ago that I would have 4,000 passwords laying around, right? That's insane.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. We really appreciate you coming on today. I hope that maybe we can get you back on another time and we can unpack a few other things. Do you have anything new and upcoming, exciting within your consulting business that we should know about?
Yeah, I would say I'm offering more targeted coaching opportunities to focus on one or two of the facilitation skills. And so if that's something where it's like, okay, I can read the book, but I really want to get feedback on the skill, I'm offering many more small chunks of like coaching, targeted coaching opportunities. So I'm focusing on that, writing, and more coaching. So that's where I'm spending most of my time.
Well, awesome. We hope to maybe next time we get together, we can talk about how you've been able to eradicate more of those bad leaders. Hopefully, in the next 10 years, maybe you'll get to all of them, right?
Oh, well, it makes me know that I have a mission every day that I wake up, because it's a pretty lofty goal, but I'm doing my best.
Well, thank you again. And for our listeners, until next time, don't forget to check out some of our past episodes. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to click the like button there and follow us wherever you're listening to us so that you get updates for the new episodes when they come out. And don't forget to check out our website and social media page at McCoy Leadership. Until next time, thank you so much.